Hi, welcome back to my channel. Thanks so much for being here. So I wanted to do a little bit of a different video today, and I've been working my way through the biggest books on my shelf, which so far have been Don Quixote, Moby Dick, and The Count of Monte Cristo. And then I have two Tolstoys down here that I'm eventually going to get to. A year ago, I definitely would not have wanted to pick up a classic that was over 500 pages, much less 1,300 pages, but I've definitely grown a lot in my reading journey over the past year or two, and now I gravitate towards these really lengthy classics. So I wanted to put together a list of tips and tricks to help somebody that was in my shoes 2 years ago. So let's just jump straight into it. These are going to be my top 10 tips to not only make it through these lengthier novels, but also to enjoy your time while doing so. Tip number 1 is to become an active reader, and this can mean a lot of different things. So you can physically become an active reader, you can annotate, take notes, mark pages with tabs, underline, and things like that. I find it very useful to mark funny quotes I find, or tab sections that I really enjoyed, so I can go back and refer to them later. I've seen people get really creative with their annotating, and some of these look like full-on art projects in the margins, which is so much fun to see. This is one of my favorite Instagrams that I've come across recently, and I'm just obsessed with this annotation style. You can get as creative as you want with it. I just really love the margin doodles. I could just stare at these type of annotations all day long. And as you can see, a lot of people have a different color coding system to mark all kinds of different things. So bringing your markers and tabs and stuff with you can really make it a fun experience. Another type of active reading is more mental. So you know how when you're driving and you're really tired and you drive 45 minutes and then you realize you weren't even paying attention and you don't even know how you got to where you got? Well, kind of the same thing can happen when you're reading these longer classics. So every 20 or 30 pages, sometimes I just check in with myself okay, do I actually know what's going on in this book? Am I paying attention? And a lot of times I'm really not taking it in. Just being aware of that can help you pay attention more and retain a lot more of the story. The crickets outside are so loud I can't even focus on what I'm gonna say next. Anyway, tip number 2 is to research the book beforehand. And not a full in-depth research, but just kind of figure out, when the author was born, what was going on at that time, and kind of how the novel was created. For example, with Jane Austen's work, the first time I read Pride and Prejudice, I kind of just jumped in and I didn't know anything beforehand, and it was so hyped up and I had all these expectations. And I was kind of disappointed because I didn't really care about, all the social drama going on and the courtship and the marriage. I just wasn't really interested in that. And I think it's because I didn't really put much gravity on those situations. But then you have to look back at it with a historical context. So Jane Austen was living through the Regency period, and during that time, a woman's livelihood was dependent on her marrying. So to Jane Austen, these little social interactions that went awry, it could be the difference between a life of poverty or a life of extreme wealth. So marriage is extremely important to the author. So if you look at it from that context, it completely changes the book. So getting this context is extremely important, and it changes the way that you view the author and even their writing styles. And I think it's a great way to enter some of these really dense, long classics. Tip number 3 is set the scene. It's so important to be comfortable while you're reading and distraction-free, and you want to have all your drinks ready and your pens, markers, anything you want to annotate with, also you can focus on what you're reading. Lately, I have found some of the best playlists on YouTube that they don't have talking because I can't listen to music with words in it while I'm reading, but they're instrumentals and they're dark and moody. I'll link some of my favorite ones below, but I love the ones that are midnight in a library and it's storming, and it's just so fun to set the scene. And when I was reading Moby Dick, I actually found some playlists on Spotify that were nautical, moody instrumentals that were so much fun to listen to while I was reading. A while back, I read The Secret History with background thunderstorms, and it was so cool. And I feel like it completely changed how I experienced the novel. Tip number 4 is to get the type of book that you want to read. So there are no telling how many different editions of the classics, or even the Kindle editions, the audiobooks, just online PDFs, hardback, paperback. There's just so many options. So to encourage yourself to read, you really want the edition that you're most comfortable with. I know a lot of people prefer paperback to hardcovers, so look for that edition and get one that is really appealing to you, and then you'll be more likely to pick it up. It may sound a little bit silly, but having a book that you think is gorgeous is definitely a good motivation to get you to read it. Tip number 5 is to read other books in between. So I don't think anybody in their right minds wants to read about the anatomy of a sperm whale for 4 hours. So it can be great to break up those really long, tedious sections of classics with something short and sweet and simple and maybe modern that's a little bit easier for your brain to digest. In the past, that's really kind of what led me to put down some of the larger books because I felt like I had to read them all at once. And I would get pretty bored in certain sections and just put them down and stop reading altogether. So I definitely recommend picking up something fun and lighthearted to give your brain kind of a rest from all the old English and heavier sections of those classics. Next is to specify certain times in the day to read these novels. So for me, I usually pick up the bigger books right before bed, and it's bad to say this, but a lot of times they make me a little sleepy, so it works out perfect in that way. But by getting into the habit of reading these books at a certain time, you can really stay dedicated and slowly chip away at that long page count. Tip number 7 is to accompany your read with the audiobook. And this is a great way to knock out a lot of the pages while you're doing kind of like mind-numbing things like driving or folding laundry and stuff like that. Like I listened to a decent amount of The Count of Monte Cristo when I had 45 to an hour-long drives to work every day and afternoon, so I got through that book really fast. And all of these classics have a ton of different recordings by different narrators and companies, so you really have your choice on which one you find the most engaging and entertaining. There are also some great free options on YouTube as well. Tip number 8 is to add physical tabs for your daily goals. I'm not sure why having like a physical tab on my book made such a big difference in motivating me to read to that tab. It definitely made me read more than just telling myself, oh, I want to read 50 pages today. I think just seeing it there and seeing yourself get closer to it really pushes you to meet that goal every day, or however many days you want to set your goals at. I like to take some of the bigger books and select a certain color tab and then just add those to however many pages I want to read each day until I get to the end of the book. Here is War and Peace by Tolstoy, and I wanted to read this over the next 2 weeks. I didn't count specific number of pages, but I just kind of divided it all evenly into 14 different days and then tabbed it up like this. Tip number 9 is to read the introductions at the beginning of these classics. Almost all of the classics have some type of foreword or introduction that contains a lot of great information about the book and the author. And this kind of relates back to tip number 2 about researching the book. A lot of times there's really great information in there about the author and the book, and you might not have to go research and, look up the backstory. So a lot of times the introduction will tell you how exactly this classic became a classic. And almost all of these classics were not popular at all at the time of their release, and usually didn't really gain popularity until after the author had passed away. So these introductions can really explain why the classic is a classic. Tip number 10 is to be kind to yourself. Some of these classics you might not enjoy, and that's perfectly fine. Everybody has different tastes and life experiences. No one is gonna interpret a book the exact same way. And don't force yourself to read these books if you're not having a good time. Unless you have to read them for school, in which case, I'm sorry, but you have no option. But even if you don't like these books, I think it's still important to read them and understand why exactly they are classics and what people love about them. There have been a lot of classics that I have not really enjoyed while reading, but I still think they're all worth reading. They all have become classics for a reason. And even when I don't really like a classic, I still find, important themes in it, or it teaches me something about myself. Hopefully these tips will help you tackle these really long classics sitting on your shelf, and you'll have fun doing so. So that's all I've got for this video. Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe if you want, and I'll see you in the next one.